Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022. Apparently time to take the masks off. If you are flying anywhere, you might have to change plans mid-air. Last night, I guess, was the big night for everybody getting coronavirus again, I suppose. We'll have to talk about that. A federal judge, I mean, technically, this person, it does count as they're getting checks. They're cashing the checks, and they clear. As a federal judge in Florida, does the sort of thing that ordinarily most other judges, won't. Like, throw the evidence out and just make the decision based on whatever the hell they feel like doing, and ordering that everybody in the entire country follow their order, not just those under the jurisdiction of the Middle District of Florida. Apparently yesterday the ruling came down from a Trump-appointed judge who's apparently something in the neighborhood of 15 years old. Look, subject of Bill's tweet, in fact, this morning. But this judge apparently not only decided to strike down the federal mask mandate for transportation and transportation hubs, airplanes, but everything else as well, trains, planes, automobiles, not really automobiles. I guess those are private, but I guess you're in a ride-sharing situation there, too. And striking down the mask mandate on some, it would be generous to say specious reasoning. And ordering that it take effect nationwide immediately. Ordinarily, a judge would do something like that and then say, but I'll agree, for instance, to a request for a stay by the government pending appeal or something like that. Because judges realize that they're fallible and these things might be appealed to the next level. But now it doesn't even look like they're appealing it. I'm not even certain whether they will or not. They haven't said. So the door is still open. But instead, they let the word go forth that everyone, I guess, should honor this judgment until such time as it might be reversed. It's happening in the 11th Circuit, so it's actually fairly likely that the super conservative judges on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals will just uphold the thing, because why the hell not? But they might draw somebody who's sensible, or two people who are sensible, and they might do something different. But airlines were making announcements mid-flight about the news of the ruling and telling people that masks were immediately optional. And, some people who were in favor of that cheered, and others, I'm sure, silently groaned, or maybe even audibly groaned. And I don't know. It was an interesting night. Lots of people, I think, quite correctly feeling badly for the people who may have made their decision, I don't know, based on the advice of Leanna Wen or someone like that you're taking a calculated risk, but you know what the situation is. And if you are vaccinated and boosted and maybe even double boosted and you're wearing a good mask, you might think, all right, it's relatively safe for me to take this trip. But there's of course the possibility they may catch COVID anyway, but being vaccinated and with all the therapeutics available, perhaps it's nothing to get too worried about, and the likelihood of having a really bad outcome, i.e. dying, is lower than ever before. So you take that risk, only to find out that mid-flight, all your plans are out the window and all your calculation of risk is out the window because somebody thought it would be fun to text, one another, and pilots communicating with one another in midair and saying, hey, I just heard that this is the case. You should make that announcement and cause chaos on your flight. Really, all of those pilots and flight attendants who did that should probably have been questioned by TSA when they landed, except they were just following the law. But, yeah, I don't know. The judgment that led them to decide to do this mid-flight, I think, was poor, lacking, you might say. They certainly could have finished every flight, and the instructions probably should have gone out that way. Just because the ruling came down at 4:15 p.m. or whenever it was, and it's now 5, doesn't mean that this flight that ends at 6 has to be unmasked for the next hour. just calm down. They can, your passengers can get the news when they land. No reason to unmask them in the midair. But that's what they did, leading to a lot of chaos and a lot of stupidity, and probably not a whole lot of illness, but, we'll start to see the numbers climb eventually, I guess. Of course, airlines are insistent that the planes are relatively safe environments because when they are in the air and flying, the pressurized cabins recirculate the air very frequently and refresh the air very frequently, and that's apparently true. Everybody seems to agree that that's the case. Of course, the air doesn't circulate when the planes are on the ground taxiing or you're waiting at the gate on either side of the flight. And might not still, it's no guarantee of anything that they're circulating the air, of course. And everywhere else where millions of other people take public transportation for hours a day on buses and trains and elsewhere, no such luck with that. So, very strange. We'll, I'm sure, be talking about that. As for now, Kagro in the Morning radio show is live, of course. As I mentioned, Bill tweeted about this morning. Thanks to that 12-year-old Trump judge, Kagro X says you no longer need to listen with a mask or pants, right? There was never any sort of pants mandate. That's certainly true. We don't do video here on this show, so you don't know what's happening. It could be that I'm in sweatpants. Does that count? I guess you would say tracksuit type pants. I got stripes on the side today. This is really fancy. I'm dressed as a Russian gangster. Anyway, let's see. In other news, nothing. That's it. That's all we're going to talk about today, I think. This judge, of course, is, as the adults used to say in my day, a piece of work. I'm not really certain exactly why that was the terminology for it. By the way, on the coronavirus front, just watching my own Loudoun County in the New York Times tracker, climbing up. It's pretty steady. There's a few days where there's a 1 or 2% dip in the numbers, but we actually had numbers hold steady over Easter weekend, which is kind of unusual. The weekend numbers frequently will drop. Less reporting is going on. Less people headed for the testing centers or reporting their tests during any weekend, and a holiday weekend, most particularly today. It's still they're not skyrocketing, but there's slow and steady increases. So hopefully we won't see any kind of giant spike, but we'll see. Everybody else, how's the United States doing? Anybody checked in on the United States? Like New York, small increase. New York City, small increase. United States, small increase. And Loudoun County, slightly bigger, a 10% increase day over day, or an increase in the 7-day average anyway. So this judge, how about it? Plenty of stuff tucked away in pocket about this weird person and several other weird people that I might need to inform you about. The judge, let's see, I have the ruling itself tucked away, and it's, a little lengthy. So I don't know that we'll read all the way through that. I don't think that's likely to happen. But it is, I have it handy, and it's of great interest. It's just very oddly written. Poorly written, really, is the way you should say it. Let me turn first to BuzzFeed News to get some background on the story. We begin with their piece from David Mack, who was tweeting about this yesterday. A federal judge struck down the CDC's mask mandate for public transportation. The federal judge in Florida, who was appointed by Donald Trump, sort of, kind of. I mean, actually was appointed, but you'll see. Just sort of barely an adult at this point. Said the CDC had exceeded its statutory authority in issuing the mask mandate. Very, again, specious ruling, but we'll get to that. A federal judge in Florida has ruled that the CDC's mask mandate in airports, transit hubs, and public transportation, and I think that probably includes, I think that's the law or the mandate that has applied until yesterday, even though the kids weren't in our area, weren't going to school yesterday, that keeps them mandatorily in masks. Have I put that together correctly? There's a mask mandate for the school bus on the way to school But masks are optional once they get there. That's the new state rule that we have to live with, thanks to Glenn Youngkin, who's trying to kill everybody. But the school bus ride was masked by federal mandate, and I think now that will be over. I'll be interested to see whether the kids were as excited about that news as the airline pilots were. I'll ask my son when he gets home whether people were masked on the trip. But anyway, so that's now gone. U.S. District Court Judge Catherine Kimball Mizelle, Mizelle. Catherine Kimball Mizelle, spelled with a K in both Catherine and Kimball, for the Middle District of Florida, wrote in a summary judgment. That's interesting, too, which you should keep in mind. It got discussed in a couple of tweets last night. Maybe you might have seen that, but people aren't really focusing on it. It's not the most important part of it necessarily, but it is what it means that she would have been doing this in summary judgment is that it never went to trial. So, by the way, she continues her record unblemished of not having actually any trial experience as an attorney. And I don't know, I guess maybe she must have presided over a trial by now at some point. But that was one of the problems with her background, which, again, we'll get to. Probably BuzzFeed is going to cover that, too, because David Mack was tweeting about it last night. Anyway, in a summary judgment, which means, again, before they got to trial, a decision on the filings alone. No oral arguments, no trial, no nothing. I mean, oral argument at the trial level, the trial is the oral argument. But you can have motion practice, I suppose, beforehand. Anyway, this means that this judge decided that there was no need to go forward with the trial, that purely as a matter of law, she could decide without a jury or anyone else what the outcome of this case should be, and that it was obvious to all, and that's why she wrote it this way, except, many people disagree, and maybe it wasn't an appropriate subject for a summary judgment. Another possibility for appeal, if anyone actually does it. So, she wrote in this summary judgment that the CDC had exceeded its legal powers by issuing the mandate in January of 2021 to help prevent the spread of coronavirus. The court concludes that the mask mandate, which she capitalizes like Trump for some reason, but they concludes that the mask mandate exceeds the CDC's statutory authority and violates the procedures required for agency rulemaking under the Administrative Procedure Act. It'll be abbreviated APA elsewhere. Mizelle wrote in her ruling, accordingly, the court vacates the mandate and remands it to the CDC. She determined, which, by the way, in case you're not up on the terminology, the remand to the CDC, or remand, as some people say, to the CDC gives the CDC the opportunity to make another rule that's supposed to be consistent with this ruling, but by the time they roll out their rule, they might have to be consistent with the appeal to the ruling. Who knows? But, I don't know whether they're going to come up with another rule or not. They might just not bother. She determined, the judge did, that the CDC had improperly invoked what is known as the, quote, good cause exception to do away with public notice and comment on the mandate, and that it failed to adequately explain its decisions in violation of administrative law. I should explain again here, ordinarily in this sort of federal rulemaking under administrative law, that's the body of law that regulates these sorts of regulatory decisions. There's a regulation for regulation. There really is. Anyway, ordinarily, in a routine rulemaking situation, for a rule that's meant to be permanent going forward and, that has major impact, and that comes up as an issue too, you promulgate a draft rule and then you put it up for a public comment period, and there's a review period, and there's hearings, and people can submit comments, and there's all sorts of things. But of course, this was an emergency measure to deal with a global pandemic. So that's the reasoning why they bypass all of the, year-long, however long it takes, it can go for several months, if not a year or more, to go through the whole process. But obviously this was supposed to be an emergency. But this judge says, I don't think so, because I deny that COVID is a big deal. And so you had to go through the whole procedure, and you didn't. And so therefore, one reason, at least, why the mandate is unconstitutional and you have to get rid of it. Let's see, where do we leave off here? Because our system does not permit agencies to act unlawfully, even in pursuit of desirable ends, Mizell wrote, quoting another case, the court declares unlawful and vacates the mask mandate. The surprise order, which may be appealed, is expected to create confusion at airports and on transportation across the U.S. A Biden administration official told reporters that agencies were reviewing the decision in order to determine the next steps, but they conceded that the ruling meant the CDC's mask mandate was no longer in effect. Now, by the way, had the shoe been on the other foot and had it been the Republicans who were anxious to keep the mask mandate in place and they had gotten this ruling from any judge, but certainly from a Democratic judge or a Democratic appointed judge, they would have ignored the whole thing and said, well, we're going to appeal, so don't go anywhere, stay tuned. Even if there was no stay issued pending the appeal, they would say, well, we're going to ignore it for the time being anyway. We're pretty sure we're going to be borne out. And in addition to that, we think this ruling only applies in the jurisdiction of this judge. So if you're in the Middle District of Florida, then you don't have to wear your mask on public transportation. But anywhere else, the nationwide effect of this thing is highly questionable, they would say. I mean, really, if that's the judge's order, that's the judge's order. It's a terrible order, and it's subject to appeal. And you might be able to move quickly and get an emergency stay from the 11th Circuit if they were, interested in doing the right thing. But unlikely that they'll be moved. They're a very conservative board. So, Biden administration said they'll be pondering the next steps. Therefore, TSA will not enforce its security directives and emergency amendment requiring mask use on public transportation and transportation hubs at this time, the official said. CDC recommend that people continue to wear masks in indoor public transportation settings. Last week, the CDC had extended its mask mandate until at least May 3rd, pointing to the spread of Omicron BA2 variant in the U.S. And by the time that additional extension expires, they'll be worried about the next variant anyway. The lawsuit was first brought... Oh, yes, right. This is interesting background, too. Pardon me, having trouble staying clear today. But the lawsuit was first brought in July of 2021 by the conservative group Health Freedom Defense Fund. Dun, 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 dun. The Health Freedom Defense Fund, HFDF. And two Florida residents, Florida woman, who said wearing masks increased their anxiety and panic attacks. And for all the accusations that they make of, liberal snowflakes, I mean, you got to wonder, about these people who are like, I can't breathe. I mean, I agree, breathing is different with the mask on than off, but I don't know. It's been a while. Toughen up already. Whatever. Okay. Officials with the Department of Justice declined to comment on the ruling. Officials at CDC did not immediately respond to a request for comment. There are laws that set boundaries for federal agencies to protect individual freedom, and the court clearly found that CDC exceeded those limits, HFDF President Leslie Manookian said in a statement. Unelected officials cannot do whatever they like to our personal freedoms just because they claim good motives and a desirable goal, and that is true. But there are also allowances for emergency rulemaking for public health. But this judge doesn't recognize those either. Mizell, by way of background, was 33 years old, that is. 33 when she became the youngest person successfully, quote unquote, I would say, successfully appointed by former President Donald Trump to the federal bench in November of 2020. Yes, I'll say that again. November of 2020. In other words, after he had lost, when it was clear that he was no longer the president. Remember the whole thing about no Supreme Court justices can be appointed in an election year? Well, you can pack the federal judiciary at other levels after there's been an election and you've lost it. Those are the rules, so they took advantage of it. All right. Appointed to the bench in November of 2020, the American Bar Association had advised that she was rated, quote, not qualified. That's another one of these and he had some record number of not qualified judges. Not qualified for the lifetime appointment. And just for fun, You should know that she is married to Chad Mizell. It's funny enough that the guy's name is Chad, but Chad Mizell served as acting general counsel for the Department of Homeland Security under Trump, as well as associate counsel at the Trump White House. So why not make my 33-year-old wife a federal judge for life? Sir, tears streaming down my eyes. So there you go. That gives you the basics on the background and the basics on the ruling. There is, of course, much commentary to be shared that's out there. I think I first saw the news thanks to the tweets of Chris Geidner, who was following David Mack and his tweets on the subject. His original tweet, new, so that's the other word for breaking. A Trump-appointed federal judge in Florida has just vacated the CDC's mask mandate in airports and other transport hubs. There was screen grabs, pictures from the ruling. Geidner begins commenting on it, says the ruling comes from Judge Catherine Mizell, Trump's youngest judge, appointed at 33, and a former Clarence Thomas clerk. And we're talking about just last week, basically. I mean, she's not there. She's not old. That's what I'm saying. She's not an experienced, wizened head, you could say. Mizell, Geidner points out, rejects the Biden administration's Chevron deference argument. Is that something we should spend time explaining to people? I think it's something that Armando has explained in the past. And I don't know, it's been too many years since I actually dealt with it in law school for me to be able to bring a quick explanation to mind. But if I rely on the internet, Chevron deference is a principle of administrative law requiring courts to defer to interpretations of statutes made by those government agencies charged with enforcing them. It's a judicial preference, a judicial canon, I suppose you could call it, but it's enshrined in the Chevron case. Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council, I think. But yes, in other words, deference to the executive branch agencies that are charged with enforcing the laws to their interpretation of things, unless the interpretations are unreasonable. And when we say unreasonable, we mean that standard of administrative law that I quote and use fairly frequently, arbitrary and capricious. If they're found to be arbitrary and capricious and without foundation and without good reason, then it's something you can say violates the Administrative Procedure Act, and so we strike it down. And so her interpretation of this is, it's arbitrary and capricious. And gosh, wait till you hear why, because it's very, very tenuous. Where did I leave off? Oh, yes, we were reading Chris Geidner saying, Mizell rejects the Biden administration's claim that the CDC and the other agencies should get Chevron deference. Then goes further, saying that Chevron wouldn't be available to them anyway because, he says, wait for it, the major questions doctrine. And that one is even harder to explain because it's brand new and invented and recently approved by the wackos on the Supreme Court. But the major questions doctrine, according to the quick internet search, explains it this way: holds that courts should not defer to agency statutory interpretations that concern questions of vast economic or political significance. The Supreme Court justifies this limitation with the non-delegation doctrine. All, subject to interpretation, of course, but in this case, the interpretation of 6 fairly conservative justices who kind of just want to do what they want to do. No Chevron deference except when there's not, and also no Chevron deference in this case because the decision involves a lot of stuff. Well, that's what federal agencies do. So that's one of the problems with the major question doctrine. It's another one of those invented things that if they get 5 robes to say it's a thing, then you start finding that hey, what do you know? It applies to everything, and there's no limiting principle to it whatsoever, and poof, the entire post World War II, New Deal government is gone. Because that's the way we loved to joke about it in our libertarian meetings back in the day. So, yeah, that's the conclusion of the judge. And there's some screen grabs here. Maybe we can spend the time heading towards the break reading from the screen grabs. Finally, the government invokes Chevron deference, arguing, this is from the opinion here, arguing that even if its reading of this regulation is not the best one, or the rule rather, about how promulgating these sorts of regulations. Even if their reading is not the best one, the court should adopt it anyway. Chevron deference. Chevron deference requires that the court defer to an agency interpretation of the statute that agency administers when the statute is ambiguous and the interpretation is reasonable. But a court defers only if the statute is ambiguous after the court uses all the, quote, traditional tools of statutory construction. Citing some relevant cases for that quote. A court may not test on Chevron to avoid rigorous statutory analysis. A court cannot wave the ambiguity flag, quoting another case, just because it found the statute impenetrable on first read. As explained above, the statute is not ambiguous. Congress addressed whether the CDC may enact preventative measures that condition the interstate travel of an entire population on adherence to CDC dictates. I'm a little late on the music here. Well, that gives away the game in terms of how she feels about what the CDC has to say. But the CDC may enact preventative measures that condition. I've reversed the meaning here, but as explained above, not ambiguous statute. Congress said CDC can enact preventative measures when interstate travel of an entire population is super dangerous, but she decides, not so much. I'll explain later.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeesh. All right, well, so let's see if I can clean up the reading just before I left. That screwed everything up, so I didn't get to finish the paragraph that I meant to finish from the ruling. As explained above, she writes, the statute is not ambiguous. Congress addressed whether the CDC may enact preventative measures that condition the interstate travel of an entire population on adherence to CDC dictates. It may not. So that is the end of the matter, according to the judge's opinion. But there's a little bit more. Nor is the government's interpretation a reasonable one, she says. And she cites again Chevron, saying equating reasonable with the question of whether the agency's answer is based on a permissible construction of the statute. To be reasonable, an interpretation must account for, quote, the specific context in which the language is used, and the broader context of the statute as a whole. Relying on another case, Robinson v. Shell Oil Company, the government here advances a reading of, quote, sanitation that untethers it from the surrounding words and the statutory structure. Such an interpretation does not merit deference. In other words, it fails the Chevron test for deference because it's not a reasonable interpretation, because she says Congress enabled CDC to set regulations for purposes of sanitation. And as she goes on to explain, you see, she has looked sanitation up in the dictionary, essentially. And it says it's supposed to, that's the act of cleaning something. And masks don't clean anything. Of course they do. They clean the air coming out of a person's mouth, essentially, and trap the virus and respiratory particles to the extent it's capable of doing on the inside of the mask. And, of course, air that's passing through on the way in, being breathed in, is filtered on the outside of the mask. So it's really not even a reasonable interpretation for her to say that it doesn't clean anything. But that's what she did. She basically said this is the dictionary definition of sanitation, and masks don't clean things. They don't wash dishes or launder your clothes. So therefore, that's what she decided to do. That's how she decided the case. That's why there's no masks on airplanes today. Okay, great. So accordingly, she says, Chevron deference does not apply. Okay, but there is an independent bar to the government's invocation of Chevron, the major questions doctrine. The government's interpretation is untenable because courts, quote, expect Congress to speak clearly if it assigns decisions of vast economic and political significance to an administrative agency, according to, decision in Alabama Association of Realtors is the source for the major questions doctrine. Moreover, the mask mandate acknowledged, there's more here, that it has significant effect on the economy. The mandate is a, quote, major rule under the Congressional Review Act and an economically significant regulatory action. These labels mean that the mandate is likely to have either an annual effect of $100 million or more on the economy. I don't see where you get a $100 million effect on the economy from asking people to, or requiring even people to wear masks anywhere, for that matter. A major increase in consumer prices, that isn't happening either, or significant adverse effects on the economy. None of that is actually happening. Regulatory planning and, this is more citations here. All told, this is no everyday exercise of federal power. So in other words, obviously a major question here, just in case she was totally wrong about her ridiculous idea about looking up sanitation in the dictionary. There's a little more here. Section something where the statute they're relying on has no unmistakably clear language indicating that Congress intended for the CDC to invade the traditionally state-operated arena of population-wide preventable public health regulations, really. Or that Congress intended to delegate a decision of such economic and political significance to an agency in so cryptic a fashion as to tie it to sanitation. Please. Because it exceeded the authority granted in the law, the court must hold unlawful and set aside the mask mandate as an agency action that is not in accordance with law, is in excess of statutory jurisdiction, and short of statutory right. Because the court agrees with the plaintiffs that the mandate exceeds the CDC's statutory authority, it does not reach the plaintiff's alternative non-delegation claim. But we'll stop reading from the decision at this point and continue back with Chris Geidner saying this all came after she rejected the statutory argument. So, a lifetime tenured federal judge who was rated not qualified by the American Bar Association and was confirmed by the Senate after Trump's election loss just issued a ruling with nationwide impact that overturns a rule in place from the CDC for more than a year. And no news yet on appeal or stay request, but acknowledgement that today's ruling means there is no more transportation mask mandate currently. Word from Ed O'Keefe saying nothing from the White House. They are reviewing the decision and assessing the potential next steps. And of course, in the meantime, people are theorizing, maybe, ironically, this Trump judge has done the Biden administration a real service here. They were aching to find a way to end the mandates and, end restrictions so that the anti-maskers would stop hurting us, I guess. I don't know. They're not going to stop protesting these things. I don't know what it's going to take to get that message through. But this theory was, they wanted to end the mask mandate, but they thought that it would divide Democrats to do so. So now they can point to the court. Possibly this is true. Who knows? Point to the court and blame it on them and then say, gosh, there's nothing we can do. Anyway, the mask or the sanitation part. I saw everyone's good Twitter friend, NYC Southpaw, tweeting about this yesterday, noting Thomas clerks strike again, taking from CNN's reporting on the subject. The first part of the judge's 59-page ruling turned on the meaning of the word sanitation, as it functions in the 1944 statute that gives the federal government the authority, in its efforts to combat communicable diseases, to issue regulations concerning, quote, sanitation. Mizell concluded that the use of the word in the statute was limited to, quote, measures that clean something. And again, the claim is masks don't clean anything, so therefore something Administrative Procedure Act. That's like literally where she's coming from on this. She actually cites the dictionary in the thing. And, that's usually considered weak reasoning, if nothing else. All right, let's see. We have, I put together all the things I collected here, include the Washington Post writing on it. Does the Post tell us anything more than BuzzFeed was able to tell us? You might be interested in the Post reporting because it includes a couple of embedded, I think maybe BuzzFeed does too, a couple of embedded videos of flight crews making the announcements in mid-flight, and that's quite annoying. I understand this morning from Twitter traffic that the New York City subways are continuing to require masks just on their own local authority. But in Washington, D.C., the metro authorities are making masks optional, which is terrific. And I guess it means we'll have more of the disease a little bit later. So here's, I guess they quote a little bit more from Mizell's opinion here, saying that since she's looked up sanitation in the dictionary, wearing a mask cleans nothing. At most, it traps virus droplets, but it neither sanitizes the person wearing the mask nor sanitizes the conveyance, that is to say, the mode of transportation, Mizell wrote. I mean, that's just flat dumb, right? It does clean something. It cleans the air that passes through the filter. That's exactly what it's built for. It doesn't sanitize the person wearing it, i.e. doesn't cure them of COVID if they have it, right? That's true. It doesn't clean the airplane by itself. Of course, it, makes cleaning more efficacious, I guess, by trapping virus particles if there are any exiting your breath inside the mask. Not all of them, I'm sure, but there's less to clean up elsewhere. But now, even under her idea that the dictionary definition of sanitizing should control, it still doesn't work, in my view. I mean, it is cleaning something. If you say it can't work because it doesn't clean anything, and I show you it does clean something, it doesn't clean the plane, but that doesn't have to do it. It doesn't have to do that in order to be an effective regulation or a helpful regulation. So, I don't know. And like the idea that, well, it doesn't clean anything. I had to tweet back to Southpaw. The Department of Sanitation is a fraud. That garbage is just as dirty after they collect it as it ever was. And they don't, they say they're a Department of Sanitation. What are they doing? That garbage remains dirty. Well, on the other hand, you might look at, well, there was garbage on the street and then they cleaned it up and took it away. The street is clean. Yes, but the garbage isn't. So, that's true. But if you do clean the conveyance, right? You would say the plane's clean, but what about the sponge that you use to do the cleaning or whatever the hell else I don't know what you use to clean a plane, but suppose you did it with a sponge. See, there's no sanitation here. That's an absurd interpretation of the thing. Anyway, the airlines, of course, went crazy, and they really took a flying leap with some of this stuff too, right? So I know that JetBlue, there's lots of videos of JetBlue flights announcing in mid-flight that you can take your masks off, and Delta apparently came out with a statement that, I don't know, they really exceeded their expertise. They basically said, well, we're glad about this, and we're glad that we've all decided now that coronavirus, that COVID is basically an endemic seasonal virus, and we're just going to deal with it the way we deal with the flu, which is to say to do nothing about it. And who the hell authorized Delta Airlines to make that kind of decision? Nobody. But whatever. Anyway, fairly interesting. Let's see. Other things that I put aside on this subject, and I know Joan will want to talk about it more, and she's got her own angles on it, but perhaps, well, we'll save this discussion for later. I mean, it certainly highlights the need for, everything. Expansion of the Supreme Court, rebalancing the federal judiciary, and serves as a reminder that, yes, winning the White House does in fact matter in terms of packing the courts with biased wackos who are totally unqualified to the job. As we said, they broke all records, shattered all records for approving judges that are rated not qualified, despite the fact that that's how they're rated. It's really quite bizarre and dangerous and stupid, but that, they're getting what they want out of it, so they're not likely to turn away from it. All right, let's see. What other things have I put away on this subject? There's a Tampa Bay Times piece from some time ago. Let's see. I'll look at the date on it. August of 2021 on the plaintiffs in the case. I mentioned to you, I said Florida woman. As at least one of them is, in fact, a Florida woman. And the Tampa Bay Times reported on the initiation of their suit. Just give you an idea. I mean, it shouldn't surprise you the outcome given where the case started. I mean, it was kind of a crackpot case to begin with, but taken up by, some well-funded, I'm sure, dark money organization from, did they say Wyoming? Yes, a not-for-profit in Wyoming, steps in and funds the lawsuit of two Florida women. Two Tampa Bay women, to be more specific. Natalie Weber wrote this up for the Tampa Bay Times. Two Tampa Bay women uncomfortable wearing masks. I'm uncomfortable. On airplane flights are partnering with a not-for-profit Wyoming organization. How? Why? To sue federal authorities over the requirement that people wear masks while using public transportation. Sarah Pope, 57, of Lutz, Florida, and Anna Carolina Daza. Perhaps she was a Carolina Daza, 49, of Safety Harbor. Look out for safety. I hate safety, she says. Take off the masks. Joined in the suit, filed with U.S. District Court in Tampa against the Biden administration, the CDC, and the Department of Health and Human Services. The Health Freedom Defense Fund, you heard of them before, the main plaintiff in the case, says the federal government exceeded its authority with the mask mandate. This is really an issue of, do the citizens have a voice in things that impact them in their daily lives, said George R. Wentz Jr., an attorney representing the plaintiffs. Sure they do. They have a voice, but sometimes science is the more important voice, at least on a temporary basis. But they always, they put this always in hyperbolic terms. And by the way, I think at some point in the ruling, and this would be the benefit of reading through the entirety of the ruling, but you've probably seen clips of it lifted by the tweeters who've been doing this. Someone somewhere picked this one up, but the judge also says, basically equates. This is a really interesting, terrible analogy, and I'm accused of making terrible analogies all the time, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm terrible at this. But she says, well, basically, to tell people that they'll be turned away at the gate, you're not going to be allowed to board this plane or to be forced, you're not allowed to do it unless you comply with our arbitrary and capricious rule about the mask, is basically tantamount to telling people that they can't go anywhere, which is basically tantamount to telling people that they're imprisoned in their homes, unlawfully detained by the tyrannical power of the federal government. In other words, not being allowed to go in someplace is exactly the same as being told you are forbidden from leaving your home or any other place. You are imprisoned in the rest of the world because you're not allowed to go into that place over there. That feels like a really bad analogy. Representatives, but back to the Tampa Bay Times here. Representatives of the Biden administration, the Centers for Disease Control, Health and Human Services, didn't respond to a request for comment. Who cares? On to the next thing. January 21st. President Joe Biden signed an executive order requiring people to wear masks as a means of protecting against the spread of COVID-19 during domestic and international travel. On January 29th, the CDC released an order requiring the use of masks on public transit and in transportation hubs, such as bus stations and airports. Traveling on public transportation increases a person's risk of getting and spreading COVID-19 by bringing people in close contact with others, often for prolonged periods, and exposing them to frequently touched surfaces, which didn't matter even at that point. Said the CDC on its website, 6 feet away from others. It's difficult to do on public transportation, but it was never worth much anyway. In the lawsuit, attorneys argue that the mask mandate is arbitrary and capricious. In excluding, why is it arbitrary and capricious? Well, you don't have to wear a mask if you're under 2. So therefore, everybody else having to wear one is arbitrary and capricious. Well, yes, no, maybe. I mean, it does, make a certain amount of scientific sense that everybody should be masked. 2-year-old can breathe droplets out with the virus in it just as much as anybody else if they actually, contract the disease. So why not? And the answer is, well, there's a practical matter of it being impossible to keep a mask on a child under a certain age. And rather than say that people who are traveling with small children are going to be held as, rogue actors acting outside of the scope of the mandate, they just say, well, the reality is you can't really do that. And thankfully, at the time, very young children weren't a super important vector of the disease. But yeah, they should have been masked. It's just a matter of, well, we can't do it. It's just physically impossible. But everybody else should take every precaution that they can, especially when it's this unobtrusive. But no, that's the basis for their claim that it's arbitrary and capricious. And by the way, I haven't seen that actually come up in any of the judges' writing on the subject. The attorneys also argue that Biden's order was an improper use of legislative authority. The Health Freedom Defense Fund is campaigning to end mask, vaccine, and COVID testing mandates, by the way. The fund's website includes printable notices to employers saying that mask, testing, and vaccine requirements violate federal law. And now they say, you thought we were crazy, but you were wrong. But they were the ones giving out things. If your employer says you got to wear a mask at work and you don't want to, print this out and show it to them. And it's jargony sounding, so maybe it'll work. Anyway, when government gets into the business of mandating what people can and can't do with their bodies, wow, I think we have a problem, says Leslie Manookian, founder and president of the Health Freedom Defense Fund, in an interview with the Tampa Bay Times. And before you even start arguing about how hypocritical that is, remember that she's saying that way to make you angry. She's fully aware of the hypocrisy. She just knows that it will make you upset, and she's going to win in court on the abortion thing, and she's going to win now on court on the mask thing, and she just wants to make you mad. In many cases, the hypocrisy is intentional. It does you no good to try to point out, don't you see that it's hypocritical? Yes, and sometimes it's even still innately embarrassing to them, but they've been instructed. You will win by doing this. Put up with, what's ironic? Put up with the discomfort and you'll get your way. Well, put up with the discomfort of the mask and we'll get rid of this virus. Well, maybe not for all and for good, but for good and all, as they actually say, instead of the one I made up. But it'll be a lot better. Anyway, if government can mandate those things, what else can government mandate? She added. I mean, okay, it's an interesting hypothetical question, but it doesn't have any legal import. Can government mandate that you get an abortion? Mandate that you do get one? No, but they can mandate that you don't, apparently. Can government mandate that you take antidepressants? Can government mandate that you take any other kind of medication? Yeah, sometimes they can, but it's usually not generally population-wide. But then this is not medication, so that's a terrible example. You see, it was just doomed from the start, logically speaking, and legally speaking, in a real courtroom, but that's not where they went. Manookian said the fund takes to the courts to fight mandates that its members believe to be unjust. Both Sarah Pope and Anna Carolina Daza are members of the fund, Manookian said. They were made members of the fund by saying, yes, we'll go ahead with this lawsuit. Pope publishes a blog, so you got to listen to her, and a YouTube channel called The Healthy Home Economist. And I guess there's a weed whacker somewhere that disagrees with the show. In a video on her channel, Pope said she wants to promote health the way, this is a good one. She wants to promote health the way her generation's grandparents experienced it. So I am the healthy home economist. I want to promote health the way my grandparents experienced it. And here's how she says they experienced it. When they got sick, they didn't need the crutch of pharmaceuticals or antibiotics to get better, she said in the video. They just got sick and they got well. So that's a pretty good scientific understanding of what happened here. When I was a kid, I remember my grandma got sick, but then she got better. So, that's the way we ought to handle public health. Did she get, what did she have when she was sick? I don't remember. She was sick. And she got better. Like, what do you mean? She was never quite the same, but, she got better. She lived. She had another birthday. And she could never eat, salt again, but, she got better. Okay. Maybe that's not actually a really good explanation of what's going on here. They got sick and they got well. And by the way, they did have the crutch of pharmaceuticals and antibiotics to get better. I don't know how old she is. What do they say how old Pope is? But she can't be that much older than me that her grandparents never took medications. I mean, quite honestly, I'm 53, right? Do you know? I'm telling you. All right, I'm 107. So there you go. My grandparents, I would say maybe the defining factor of life for my grandparents, as I remember it, was the extraordinary large number of medications that they were taking. That there was a huge handful of pills that they took every day with breakfast. My recollection is my grandparents were chock full of pharmaceuticals. There are more pharmaceuticals now. Maybe we'll be, when we grow up to this age of where I guess I'm almost there, by the way. My grandparents weren't that old when I was a young kid, and I guess I'm getting to that age myself. I don't know. We'll all be taking 100 pills this morning, but I don't know what she's talking about. And it doesn't matter because it's not the basis for anything. Not legal, not logical, not even in just having casual conversation with somebody. Well, when I was a kid, my grandparents didn't have the crutch of pharmaceuticals or antibiotics. Yes, they did. But they didn't use it. Well, even if that were the case, what would I care? Your grandparents were a couple idiots. What do I know? What difference does that make to me? Besides which, you're completely wrong. They were taking all kinds of antibiotics and pharmaceuticals. You just had no idea because you were a kid. What do you care? And they probably told you they're my vitamins, so they didn't want to worry you. This one's for my blood pressure. This one's for my heart. This one's for my diabetes. Whatever. It's stupid, is what I'm saying. Okay, so let's see. Moving on from there, where do we leave off with that crazy nonsense? All right. Yes, there we are. So she wants it to be like it was for her grandparents, for whatever reason. Recently, Pope skipped a family trip to Hawaii. Why? Because she said wearing a mask for the entire flight would give her anxiety, according to the lawsuit. Which, I don't want to downplay legitimate anxiety, but, basically that's kind of a so what question. Well, Your Honor, I'm filing suit against the federal government to remove the mask mandate. Well, why? Well, it's affected me in weird ways. Like, for instance, my family went to Hawaii, but I didn't go because wearing a mask for the entire flight would give me anxiety. To which I would say, well, all right, so what's the injury? Well, I didn't get to go to Hawaii. But that's because you were dealing with your anxiety, right? Yeah. I mean, how do I know that planes don't give you anxiety? Maybe that was the reason you didn't go. Or, I don't care what the reason is. There's no federal mandate that says everybody has to go to Hawaii. What are you telling me this for? That's not in the lawsuit, of course. This is the organizer who helped raise the dark money to pay for the lawsuit, saying, I'm doing this because I really truly believe in it. Why, for instance, I didn't go to Hawaii. By the way, I also have never gone to Hawaii, and not because of anxiety. You know what? Going to Hawaii, here is the reason. I do have anxiety about it. I've never gone to Hawaii because I get anxiety thinking about how much money it costs to go to Hawaii. So I'm suing the federal government because, I don't know, reasons. I'm anxious now about not being able to go to Hawaii. Whatever. This is just, I give you an idea of where this dumbness is coming from. She still flies to see her mother in Virginia, by the way, and wears a mask as required, but avoids long flights. So again, here I'd say there's nothing the government can do to help you. Daza usually takes an annual trip to visit family in Colombia and is planning to travel in August. That would be last year. According to the lawsuit, she feels like she cannot breathe while wearing a mask and feels the urge to remove it. I mean, I feel the urge to remove it. I'm sweaty under here, but then I don't. She said she also experiences headaches and shortness of breath. A doctor's note diagnosing Daza with anxiety does not grant her an exemption from the mask mandate, the lawsuit states. Well, maybe I've mixed people up. Maybe Pope is one of the plaintiffs. But I thought she was the organizer that paid for it. Let me scroll back and see here. Yeah, Sarah Pope was one of the plaintiffs. So she, poor lady, didn't go to Hawaii from Florida, by the way, because she didn't want to wear a mask for a long time. It's not a real injury. Anyway, the lawsuit filed in Tampa includes declarations from 3 additional members of the Health Freedom Defense Fund detailing travel plans that were affected by the mask mandate. According to TravelPulse.com, at least 3 other lawsuits have been filed challenging the federal mask mandate on public transportation, including one other case in Florida. In Washington, D.C., a resident sued after he was prevented from boarding a flight out of Orlando in June for not wearing a mask. In his lawsuit, the man said he had a qualifying disability that exempts him from the mask mandate and had been stranded in, you'll never guess where, the Villages. Because of the rule. I love that claim, right? I wouldn't wear a mask. I claim to have a medical exemption. Not really sure whether there are any, but there's got to be one somewhere. Maybe he had the valid one. But I'm being imprisoned in the Villages, like the prisoner, because of this rule. You can leave, you can rent a car, you can go by Uber, go by train, or I guess you have to wear a mask on train too. But you could arrange for private transportation to get you to Washington, D.C. if you really need to. But, this guy, I'm a prisoner in the Villages as a result. Unlawful, unjust imprisonment. Psh, please. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, well, I should probably move on from this subject, but there's a little bit more here in the Tampa Bay Times piece. CDC's rule has also faced challenges CDC has also faced challenges to other COVID restrictions, like the ones imposed on cruise ships amid the pandemic. We have, let's see. Is there more here? Oh, yes, right. I'm sorry. There was the guy who was imprisoned in the Villages. The mask requirement has also faced challenges from a rideshare driver in Illinois and a, quote, frequent flyer and attorney from Hollywood, California, who I think they hate their values, so I'm not sure that's going to help. CDC also faced a challenge on its cruise ships restrictions. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, of course, sued the agency in an attempt to restart cruise voyages. A federal judge in Tampa threw out the CDC's rules. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that decision and left those restrictions in place, and DeSantis has asked the U.S. Supreme Court for a ruling. So all is not lost necessarily. The 11th Circuit has reversed and reimposed restrictions in the past. But perhaps at this point in the pandemic, they might not be as willing to do so. Just wanted to give you, again, an idea of where it's coming from. The people say they're making up things that they've lost out on, essentially, through their own, for their own reasons, and then blaming that on the mask mandate and making the rest of us sick for the rest of our lives because they don't like, I don't know what, sweating under their masks, I guess. And that's just not enough for me. All right, let's see. I did make mention of this because I think it was in the BuzzFeed article, but another tweet bringing this fact to the fore. Climate reporter for Grid News, David Levitin, tweeting, fun fact, one of the team members of Jared Kushner's venture, what did we call it? Hedge fund, the new one that he raised $2 billion from the Saudis for. One of the people on his very inexperienced team, this is now a family trait here, on his very inexperienced team, you'll recall when we read about the formation of his hedge fund that the vetting team over at the Saudi Wealth Fund said, none of his team have any experience and no real investment records. They're just not qualified to handle our money. And MBS said, give them the money anyway. Well, one of the members of that hedge fund, which now, of course, is back in the news once again, touting its Trump connections in order to get that Saudi investment money and others now. There's a whole report out today about the way Jared Kushner has been pitching his hedge fund by saying we have connections all over the place and our connection to Trump, and he'll maybe be president again, so therefore you should invest with us. But one of his underexperienced or inexperienced pals helping run the fund is Chad Mizell, the husband of the inexperienced and unqualified judge. So something of a family tradition. I'm unqualified to run a hedge fund, but I'm going to do it. You're unqualified to be a federal judge, but you're going to do it. This is really awesome. So there you go. How do you like that? One of the team members of Jared Kushner's fund is married to the judge who today struck down the federal transportation mask mandate. And here's the profile. Chad Mizell, senior legal at wherever, formerly at Jones Day, according to his bio, served as acting general counsel at the Department of Homeland Security. He also was like 12 years old, it looks like, where he managed more than 2,000 lawyers, chief of staff for the Department of Homeland Security, associate counsel to the president, the White House, counsel to the Deputy Attorney General, U.S. Department of Justice, clerked for David Sentel in the D.C. Circuit, and yada yada. So, you trade government jobs at a certain level, whether you are qualified for it or not. It's a link to the Intercepts article about Jared Kushner. That's what I was thinking of. Jared Kushner flaunted his influence with Saudi Arabia and Russia. Russia, oh my God, I can't believe it. That deserves some dramatic meaning, at least. Jared Kushner flaunted his influence with Saudish Arabia, and Russia to pitch to investors, affinity partners, boasts of, quote, accelerating transformation through connectivity in a slide deck obtained by The Intercept and written up here by Ken Klippenstein. And I don't think we even have to go down this road. I mean, you knew that that's what he was doing. And you knew that's why the contribution from the Saudis was that valuable. Now he can say, they trust me and I am an insider with them. But Russia, that shouldn't work right now, but I guess it will still among Republicans. All right, so that's interesting. What else have I got on this subject? Yes, I also grabbed this interesting tweet on the subject from yesterday. Jason P. Steed, former English professor, now appellate lawyer, who tweets on Twitter as Fifth Circ Appeals. So I guess he specializes in watching the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He writes, how to undermine the credibility of, quote, textualism. And it's the judge's insistence that having looked up sanitation in the dictionary, that she knows what to do here. The screen grab reads that the law indicates that sanitation and other measures refer to measures that clean something, not ones that keep something clean. I mean, what a distinction to make, by the way. Sanitation refers to measures that clean something, not measures that keep something clean. No, wrong. That's just not an actual, I don't think, accepted definition of sanitation. Wearing a mask cleans nothing. At most, it traps virus droplets, but it neither sanitizes the person wearing the mask nor sanitizes the conveyance. We read that part. Because the CDC required mask wearing as a measure to keep something clean, explaining that it limits the spread of COVID-19 through prevention, but never contending that it actively destroys or removes it, the mask mandate falls outside of their statutory authority. Isn't that amazing? And that is rather astonishing. It doesn't clean anything. It cleans the air, I would tell you. Well, no. I rule that it doesn't. That's it. I mean, this is basically what it comes down to. Wearing a mask cleans nothing. At most, it traps violence, but doesn't virus droplets. It doesn't sanitize a person or the conveyance, but it sanitizes or helps keep clean everything inside the conveyance. No, but that doesn't matter because helping keep something clean isn't sanitizing. Cleaning something is sanitizing. You really can't base a quote-unquote major decision on that kind of distinction. One, the distinction is fake and wrong. And two, there's a little bit too much riding on it to make a decision like that based on something as, it seems to me as facially stupid as the distinction between, well, sanitizing is cleaning something, not keeping something clean. If it's dirty and you clean it, you've sanitized it. If it's clean and you clean it again so that it doesn't become dirty, that's not sanitizing it. Yeah, it is actually, because there's always something landing on it. I mean, all you'd have to do, I guess, under your definition is, if I can find one molecule of dirt here, then I'm sanitizing it. I've just cleaned something. I don't have to worry about keeping it clean because I'm always cleaning something. And you'll never convince me that, in between two cleanings, nothing lands on the surface and it never needs to be touched again. Anyway, it's just a stupid idea, and I can't emphasize to you enough times how stupid it really is. I think that's the end of what I collected on this thing. There was another crazy-ass ruling out there yesterday that Jonathan Wiseman picked up. I mean, when I say crazy-ass ruling, I've mischaracterized it. It's a good ruling. It's a ruling about somebody else who's a crazy-ass. I've got that backwards. Here's what's going on. I guess just because they're back-to-back, I've mixed it up here. But Jonathan Wiseman was covering ruling from another district judge, this time down in Georgia. Somebody has essentially begun the process of seeing if they can remove Marjorie Taylor Greene from the ballot in Georgia under the same sort of challenge provision as was used to try to remove Madison Cawthorn as an insurrectionist in North Carolina. You'll recall that the courts in North Carolina said, nah, we're probably not going to let this go forward. But it's not necessarily dead. But because of time limitations, it might end up being dead. But in this case, U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg, who is, in fact, I think, if I read correctly, the sister of, but is certainly related to NPR's Nina Totenberg, which, the conservatives will no doubt run away with in their rhetoric. But U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg ruled strongly, Jonathan Wiseman says, very Trump-esque, that the 1872 Amnesty Act, remember that being at the heart of Cawthorn's claims that he could not be excluded, the Amnesty Act doesn't, in fact, prospectively apply to future insurrectionists, because that's a normal and sensible interpretation of it. Jumping back one tweet in his mini thread here, breaking in a 73-page ruling, a federal judge has denied Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's bid for a restraining order to block legal action to remove her from the November ballot as an insurrectionist disqualified from office by the 14th Amendment. It's very interesting. And I could read you the article just to catch you up on all of it. And then we could then probably skip the whole thread here. But just long story short, next stop for Marjorie Taylor Greene, an administrative law hearing as early as Friday. And there's a chance now that she'll have to answer questions under oath in cross-examination about her actions before, during, and after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. It's very exciting, really. The disability outlined in that provision of the Constitution remains exactly that, a disability that disqualifies an individual who is engaged in acts of insurrection in violation of their oath of office from running or holding office. The background information that he provides, of course, same case went the other way on Madison Cawthorn. So, we'll see where this one goes. I saw some people complaining, oh my gosh, she's being denied due process. Don't you think we should wait and to charge her and convict her of insurrection before you do this? And the answer is, well, we're at early stages here. All that was happening was somebody was filing an action that would trigger an administrative law hearing in Georgia, under Georgia law, about whether or not she belonged on the ballot. And I'm sure that the administrative law judge who eventually sits on this case would appreciate it if there was a conviction for insurrection. It would make the case easy. But it doesn't mean the case can't go forward. Does it mean the case could be stronger? Yeah, it could be stronger. But there's no denial of due process here. She wasn't booted off the ballot. All that Judge Totenberg says here is you can now begin the process, the due process, as a matter of fact, of determining whether or not the prohibition applies. And the administrative law judge may very well say, no, it actually doesn't, so don't worry about it. I don't know. Anyway, that's a pretty interesting development there, and I'm pleased to point out that, is this a new, did he do a new write-up on the thing here? No, this is an older piece. Okay, but maybe that hasn't been written up yet. Maybe Joan knows about that one. But at any rate, that's an exciting development, that an administrative law judge will sit down and say, well, bring me the evidence that she's an insurrectionist, and it might even involve cross-examining her under oath in a court, which should go pretty poorly for her, probably. It may yet be the case that they just can't nail down to the satisfaction even of an administrative law judge. I'm like dismissing them as not real judges, but they are. But you might not be able to demonstrate at this point that, to the satisfaction of a judge, she was in fact an insurrectionist. And that's true. And I guess the guy's point about waiting so that you have a stronger case, that's what it goes to. But on the other hand, the elections are coming too. And if you wait too long, i.e., even if you wait for an insurrection charge to be levied or to actually go, forget about it. If you're trying to wait for it to go to court, the election will have come and gone by that point. And then it'll be a question of, well, we would have disqualified her if we had known this then, but we didn't. And now she's been elected. And so that's all you got. You could try to exclude her from the next ballot, maybe, but good luck. So I don't know. To me, it's like, well, you got to take this shot at it now. And the fact that it lands her in a courtroom somewhere having to answer questions under oath, that's pretty good. Because so far they haven't been able to get her to do that anywhere. And by the way, if she refuses to go, it is possible, I don't know that it's likely, but it is possible that the administrative law judge may say, well, I'm just going to have to enter a default judgment against you if you're not going to come here and testify. Or at a minimum, if you won't testify, I can say, all right, you want to take plead the fifth. I guess I'm entitled to make certain inferences based on that, although, it doesn't mean that there's actual evidence entered onto the record by you that you're guilty, but there are certain inferences that I'd be entitled to make, and maybe they would be made to your detriment. It's very exciting, and at very least, I love the idea that she could end up having to answer questions in court. Let's see, other things to go over. Things to spend a little bit of time on anyhow. Let's see. There's more on Mike Lee. Yesterday we discussed Mike Lee a little bit more, and I think I skipped one additional piece on Mike Lee from the hometown paper, or at least the home state paper. I think the Salt Lake Tribune had a piece on him, and now there's a new item from, is it Amanda Carpenter, in the Bulwark, more of his texts and more analysis of his texts. And I just thought I would add that to the picture because it's actually, the picture is growing quite dark for Mike Lee these days. The Salt Lake Tribune, in its own analysis of the original batch of texts, is here. The headline they're using to really make the point is a quote from those texts. Please tell me what I should be saying. Text messages show Senator Mike Lee assisting Trump efforts to overturn the 2020 election, very much in his candidate in a box role here. Newly released text messages show Lee knew of the scheme to send alternate electors to Congress nearly a month earlier than he claimed. That's the new interpretation of things here that we haven't quite discussed. Brian Schott, Schott, wrote this piece, and perhaps we should wade through at least part of it. Newly released text messages from last week between Senator Mike Lee and former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows show Lee was advising and assisting former President Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The messages also reveal Lee was aware of a legally dubious strategy to have then Vice President Mike Pence throw out the Electoral College votes much earlier than he had claimed. And I believe the claim he makes appears in the Bob Woodward, Robert Costa book. What the hell did they... Now I can't even remember what the hell they titled it. Because I didn't get it and I didn't read it. We read all about it in the paper instead. But they print that he claims I didn't know about this stuff until a certain date. When in fact now he's on the record having been texting about it the whole time. CNN published almost 100 text messages from Lee and Texas Representative Chip Roy to Meadows in the aftermath of Trump's 2020 election loss. The texts trace how Lee went from being a fierce advocate for Trump's efforts to warning the White House that the scheme could backfire. Lee eventually announced he was opposed to a plan to have Congress object to the Electoral College results in some battleground states, but the texts reveal that only came after Lee worked for months to assist Trump's efforts. Lee's efforts to assist Trump began on November 7th, the day Democrat Joe Biden was declared the winner. He texted Meadows a statement signed by the leaders of several prominent conservative groups urging Trump to, quote, exhaust every legal and constitutional remedy in challenging the results. Use it however you deem appropriate, Lee wrote, and if it's helpful to you for you to leak it, feel free to do so. Oh boy, that's no leaks. I hate leaks. Lee also pressed Meadows to help lawyer Sidney Powell gain access to Trump. Powell alleged a secret cabal, including George Soros, the late Hugo Chavez, and the CIA and thousands of elections officials conspiring all to steal votes from Trump in 2020. Sidney Powell is saying she needs to get in to see the president, but she's being kept away. Apparently, she has a strategy to keep things alive and put several states back in play. Can you help her get in? Wrote Lee on November 7th. 2 days later, Lee again reaches out on behalf of Powell. Sidney told us the campaign lawyer who do not know, are not focused on this and are obstructing progress. There's some grammatical errors in here. I have no way of verifying or refuting that on my own, but I have found her to be a straight shooter. I think we already heard all of that stuff. Maybe now we'll jump over to Amanda Carpenter's piece here, because I think she touches on all of this too, and in a slightly more pointed way, and with the benefit of a couple extra days to put together the analysis and hear more news. Mike Lee's role in Trump's attempted coup. What would happen, she asks in the subheader here, had his plan worked? Well, in a democracy. But again, this is in the Bulwark. Don't love the Bulwark. Don't love Amanda Carpenter. But interesting to see the Never Trumpers, or the newly minted Never Trumpers anyway. She's been one for a while, but I don't know how. I have a hard time trusting Amanda Carpenter, but she seems to be sincere in this. Anyway, this is the piece. Senator Mike Lee's defenders insist his repeated texts to Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, offering his guidance on the proper constitutional process to overturn the 2020 election results, prove his honor. He thinks these are exonerating texts. Never mind that the basis for overturning the election wasn't anything more than Donald Trump's desire to do so. Details, schmeetails. Basically, she's pointing out that while he disavowed it at the end, the whole thing only came to life because he and others worked so hard to try to convince the American public that there was a real thing here. And maybe they should have figured out whether there was or wasn't before they opened their effing mouths the first time. Anyway, let's bat the argument around, though. The texts show Lee was eager to assist Trump in challenging the election, to the point of Lee texting Meadows dozens of times, begging, please tell me what I should be saying. Which, like I said, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm talking about. Please work my mouth like a puppet. And offering his advice about what should be done. And then she notes here, pour one out for his Article 1 project. Of course, he considers himself Mr. constitutional textualist originalist, right? Specifically, these texts and others, maybe that's what textualism means. You should obey my texts rather than the law. Never thought of that possibility. Specifically, these texts and others, Lee's other on-the-record statements show he was consistent in advocating that the only way, according to the Constitution, to change the outcome was for state legislators to appoint alternate slates of electors for Congress to accept on January 6th. Lee spent much time and effort insisting on this, but the state legislatures did not. They wouldn't do it. So Lee did not raise any objections on January 6th and voted to certify Joe Biden as president. And for this, Lee is supposed to be some kind of a hero. So slow clap, it says here. Because what if GOP-controlled state legislatures in the swing states that Biden won had decided to appoint Trump electors based on whatever Cheetos dust some drive-by gang of cyber ninjas sniffed and got high on while seizing Dominion voting machines? That's a good way of putting it. Well, as Lee wrote Meadows on January 3rd, everything changes, of course, if the swing states submit competing slates of electors pursuant to state law. Got that? Everything changes. If state-level Republicans had been okay with overturning the election results, then Lee was okay with it too. In interviews with Bob Woodward and Robert Costa for their book Peril, there's the name, which came out in September of 21, Lee depicted himself as someone who, through December 2020, never wavered from the view that Congress had no role in messing with the Electoral College votes. That story goes that someone, quote, directed him to speak with John Eastman around Christmas time. Soon, Senators Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz started looking at other options to challenge the election results, and Lee didn't go along with their plans. Then, on January 2nd, in Woodward and Costa's account, Lee was, quote, shocked to receive a memo from Eastman. The memo, the short 2-page version, not the 6-page version Eastman later developed, outlined a scenario where 7 states have transmitted dual slates of electors to the President of the Senate. It's conceivable Lee was shocked that Eastman wanted the President of the Senate, Mike Pence, to play such a prominent role on January 6th. But the idea of alternate electors is one that Lee knew plenty about because he and his friends had been talking about it quite a bit. Some relevant texts to keep in mind. Lee writing to Meadows on November 9th, 2020, quote, "We had steering executive committee at CPI tonight with Sidney Powell as our guest speaker. My purpose in having the meeting was to hosting it, I guess, was to socialize with Republican senators." That's funny. Not to socialize with Republican senators, but to socialize with the senators to get them used to the fact that POTUS needs to pursue his legal remedies. You have in us a group of ready and loyal advocates who will go to bat for him, but I fear this could prove short-lived unless you hire the right legal team and set them loose immediately. And his idea of the right legal team was Sidney Powell and John Eastman, by the way. On November 23rd, Lee told Meadows that Eastman has, quote, really interesting research, indicating that he was familiar with Eastman and respected his analysis. By this point, Eastman was apparently just starting to work with Trump's political legal team. He had not yet written his infamous memos or represented Trump in a rejected Supreme Court motion, but had sent out plenty of tweets insinuating that Democrats had, by various means, stolen the 2020 election from Trump. And now, of course, we know that Eastman had been working on this theory for 20 years prior, beginning in Florida in 2000. We learned that yesterday. On December 8th, Lee texted Meadows, "If a very small handful of states were to have their legislatures appoint alternative slates of delegates, there could be a path." Lee was on board with Kraken Lady, Coup Memo Man, and an alternative elector plot. Check, check, check. The CPI that Lee mentioned is presumably the Conservative Partnership Institute. Its leaders and a who's who's list, it should probably be a who's who's list of other prominent Lee allies in the conservative movement issued an open letter on December 10th that said, "The evidence overwhelmingly shows officials in key battleground states, as the result of a coordinated pressure campaign by Democrats and allied groups, violated the Constitution, state and federal law in changing mail-in voting rules that resulted in an unlawful and invalid certification of Biden victories. There's more, of course. Notice the line, state legislators in battleground states should, as it comes in the letter that's quoted here, appoint clean slates of electors to the Electoral College to support President Trump. That is what the activist conservatives in Lee's circles were loudly, openly demanding. They publicly endorsed the scheme to, through the power of state legislatures, convert Biden's electors into Trump electors, all without any of the evidence of voter fraud that Lee spent 2 months searching to find. There's more to the piece. You should read it, of course, but we're going to take a break and come back and speak with Joan McCarter, maybe about this, maybe about other things. Who knows? But the picture, like I said, gets darker for Mike Lee, not that it'll affect any of his voters. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Joan is with us. We're talking about neighborhood events, I guess, for you in Idaho. I was just asking her whether any of the kids in the neighborhood, maybe they're done playing soccer and riding their bikes. Maybe they had become federal judges lately. But what's up with your federal prosecutors?
There's one who lives up the street.
Oh, hi.
Who prosecuted Ammon Bundy. I don't know if you saw the latest one. He was tossed in jail for 10 days for trying to claim that the community service he was conducting after his conviction of, illegal trespass in the Capitol building, that whole, remember all that?
Yes, right.
And sort of the
that could be any
precursor
week for him, but yes.
Precursor to January 6th. Anyway, Ammon has been getting in a lot of trouble showing up where he's not supposed to be showing up, fighting masking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So he tried to claim the community service he was ordered to complete was done by campaigning for governor.
Because it's
that his appearing in multiple Idaho counties as a gubernatorial candidate was his community service.
Right.
The judge didn't buy it.
Good.
And
you're supposed to be cleaning up garbage.
He was put in jail for 10 days, and
Perfect.
The prosecutor who helped make that happen had Bundy protesters show up at her door, which is just down the street from me. And then they went neighbor to neighbor putting these obnoxious flyers on everybody's porches.
Oh, saying your neighbor is a jerk.
Saying he's being held in solitary confinement, and these people are, worse than Hitler. And
well, everybody's worse than
so
Hitler
that's my
these
neighborhood.
days.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay, well, that's all right. It's important to get an update on what's going on, and that's an important story. I tucked that away somewhere because I thought that was funny, and I don't think we ever got to it on the air that he was sentenced to community service, and he thought, my campaigning for governor is a service to all. That should count. So I'm glad he didn't fool the judge. But so now protests against the people who said, that's not real. So too bad. I'm sure some of your time in the last day or so has been spent on Doogie Howser JD, who invalidated the mask mandate. But I've been talking about it all morning. But certainly, if there's anything you want to add to that or perspective on it.
There's the Chad part of it. I mean, we really do have another Clarence and Ginny Thomas in the making here.
Yeah, well, they have models for. I mean, where did they get that idea? Could it have been from the guy she clerked for, who is running this whole same scheme? Very interesting. Yeah, so he's he himself a youngish lawyer who's just been passed around to various very impressive sounding titles that would ordinarily, qualify you for serious and important work afterwards, provided you had done about, I don't know, say good 10 years of appellate law before you moved into those jobs. They are jobs for youngish people, despite the lofty titles, because it's hard work if you know what you're doing. But if you don't care and the president who's appointing you doesn't care if you do the work either, then I guess it's not quite as difficult. But yeah, Chad's been in and out of some very impressive sounding jobs, and also, I guess,
getting those jobs through Stephen Miller, who he's great friends with.
Yes.
So that tells you a lot about Chad.
Yeah.
But when he was named acting general counsel for the Department of Homeland Security, it freaked a lot of people out because, again, no experience.
Right.
And this was the lead counsel for the department on immigration issues, on everything else, but primarily immigration. Miller. And most people thought he had no business being in that position, except for Stephen Miller, who said, let's give it to him.
Yep.
So yes, this tells you a lot about our judge.
And now I understand also he is, I mean, all those great jobs that you're given. I mean, the point of getting those jobs for most people who pursue them is that, okay, when the administration ends, granted, you're not going to stay at the highest levels of government. That's the prerogative of the new president to put their people in, especially if it's from another party. But usually you then trade that for, like a major high-paying private gig somewhere. And you move into some other aspect of private practice of law, and you're a partner at a big appellate firm or something, or whatever, a big corporate firm. I understand Chad's new assignment is he's on the board of Jared Kushner's new hedge fund that just got funded by the Saudis, which is an interesting side gig, I guess, or actually it's his only gig. But and I think he's legal counsel there, so I guess it's still a law job, but. And it could pay great because they just got handed $2 billion. Who knows? But he's not on. He didn't. I guess you can choose to go on any path you want. But ordinarily, you would, if somebody was actually super qualified and could hold those government jobs, they would parlay it into a major position in corporate law, as opposed to. Let's have Saudi princes give us money. But I guess that's good work if you can get it too.
Just astounding.
Yeah.
Just astounding.
So, anywho, you can still wear a mask if you want, and I do want to. So there is that.
The administration has said, well, okay, we're going to let this stand while we look at it.
Yeah.
They didn't immediately apply for an injunction.
Yeah, that was kind of questionable, and I guess that's what led people to think maybe they are in fact relieved that the mandate won't be their problem anymore. But
possibly let somebody else, blame it on the courts.
Maybe, but yeah, in
blame
terms
it on
of
this, and honestly, they might not be wrong because. The 11th Circuit is completely dominated now by Trump appointees. He's got 6 of them on the circuit court that would hear an appeal. Or, there's the Supreme Court, which certainly would have no problem at all. They've done it before, overriding a CDC mandate on the eviction moratorium.
True. And I suppose
and they did it from the shadow docket. So, I don't think that the path for the administration in trying to keep this in place through the courts is at all guaranteed.
Mm-hmm. Not promising. Though I did just read earlier, I was surprised to find that the 11th Circuit reversed an earlier Florida district court decision on the cruise ship mandates, the cruise ship regulations that DeSantis had challenged, that the district judge had gone with the DeSantis position, and the 11th Circuit reversed, which I thought was
there's
interesting.
that,
So, they managed to find 2 judges that weren't appointed by Trump, I guess, out of however many.
So.
But yeah, rolling the dice when there are 6 Trump appointees. Not all Trump appointees do everything, and sometimes they redeem themselves. But yeah, you're right. It could certainly. You don't want another loss on the books if you can avoid it, especially if you were kind of thinking, maybe we don't want to take the blame for continuing this thing. And who knows whether the advice is, people will get sick, but, the numbers, it's just not going to be like the Omicron thing for now. So roll the dice. I don't know. I think it's a terrible idea, but.
I think it's a terrible idea. I'm in my mask all the time when I'm out of the out of the house anyway. But
Right. Well, I'm keeping it. And, I'll have to ask the kids whether. I think that was the rule that was keeping the mask on the school bus. So it just occurred to me that I've just sent them on the school bus this morning, and I sent them with a mask, but who knows? You can wear it if you want to. But all right, well, bad news, and everything that we knew about what Trump was up to with his judicial appointments. That's what the whole thing was about. He shattered all the records for the number of not qualified rated judges that he nominated and got through regardless of not being qualified.
Mm-hmm. 10 of them, I think. She was the 10th.
Yeah, one of the late appointees after he had already lost. She must have been sweating, by the way. That would have been an interesting thing. I wonder if Chad was annoyed or thought he wasn't going to get the prize when November rolls around, the election takes place, Trump loses, and his wife's still not set up.
Oh, they knew Mitch McConnell. I think they felt okay about it.
Oh, okay. Well.
And, it's also important to remember that
right.
This is November 2020. We've got Trump being Trump. We've got the election stuff. But we also are really still suffering in COVID related terms. And as of that, we still haven't had another COVID relief bill pass.
Wow.
We're in this emergency.
Right.
We're in this public health emergency. We're in this economic emergency. We still have people at home unable to work. And this is when McConnell is refusing to consider any kind of further COVID relief.
Yuck. Well.
So he's putting through these judges instead.
Yeah.
So, the context is always important when thinking about Republicans.
Yep. I bet he masks on the plane.
I'm sure he does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he should anyway, really. Even if there's no airborne disease, it'd probably be wise for him to cover his face in public generally. So, but then again, Marjorie Trader Green masks used to in the airport. Because you didn't, I don't want anything to miss out on anything important like my flight.
Yeah.
But, on the House floor, nothing important here happens anyway. So, all right. Well, and she had a adverse court outcome yesterday.
She did, and she can legally be challenged now. Her ability to run for re-election. Is this what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I think so. I think all she was looking for, she was trying to block the initial process, whereby Georgia residents can file a challenge anyway. So now they can go ahead and have their challenge, and they'll have a hearing. An administrative law judge in Georgia will hear the case, and if everybody requests it and lines it up right, she could be called to testify under oath about, she'll have to come and say, I'm not an insurrectionist. And I don't know exactly what they'll do to prove that she is to the satisfaction of a law judge, but there'll be a nice day in court, possibly as soon as this week, apparently, where
that'll be fun.
She gets to be called in and give her word salad. And if you get the wrong ALJ, who doesn't appreciate garbage excuses and garbled syntax, you might be in trouble. So we'll see. But at the very least, they will have an opportunity. Someone qualified maybe ought to think about flying down to Georgia, even if they, are the only one wearing a mask. Fly down to Georgia to help out with the questioning. I wonder who's going to be dealing with that, because he got a chance to put Marjorie Taylor Greene under oath and ask her questions about January 6th.
Yes,
That
we
should
would
not be
very much
wasted.
like one of the January 6th committee members to be in the room, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, at least to observe, pass notes, if nothing else. Jamie Raskin, maybe you want to, if you don't want to get on a plane, drive down.
I am more aware of Boebert's probable collusion on January 6th.
Yeah, she was a little more obvious.
Well, I don't know what the right word is. I'm not as up on what Green might have been doing that day.
Yeah, I think...
and the days immediately before.
Yeah, I know. Well, of course, some persistent portion of the internet or the Twitter keeps insisting, of course, that she's the person who planted the pipe bombs. I think that's hilarious, but I don't think it's real. So I don't know. But they keep pointing at these pictures and saying, "Look, it looks just like her," and it doesn't look like her.
It doesn't look like anybody. They're too covered
Right.
up. Yeah.
But I think initially she might have been accused of being one of the members who gave tours. But I think that her name has dropped out of that list since then. I haven't seen that mentioned very often. I remember seeing her in the undisclosed location to which they evacuated members and walking around maskless and laughing it up. But
having a gay old time.
So we'll see. But I guess, I don't know, maybe Colorado doesn't have a statute like that. I guess it will be just the old Southern Confederacy states that had those laws on the books for the insurrectionist things. But at least the good news is there's a level-headed federal judge who has decided the other way, unlike the North Carolina judge who said, the Amnesty Act gives... not only forgives those who might have been charged with insurrection pursuant to the Civil War, but all future insurrectionists too are absolved of any blame if they are already, if they're serving in Congress. You can't prevent them, because now we're giving amnesty to all insurrectionists, and it didn't say that it doesn't apply forward going into the future. So that seemed like a rather nonsensical conclusion in North Carolina. And this judge, a Totenberg, as it happens, says the opposite. And I think that's common sense, but of course it'll take about 10 seconds for Republicans to say, well, of course, a Totenberg.
Yeah.
So, anywho.
I'd have to admit I am not up to speed so much with what's happening with our insurrectionist members of Congress.
I should let you tell me what you are up to speed on and what you like to talk about instead of what I want to talk about.
Well, there is Mike Lee, and I'm up to speed on him.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well.
Little worm?
Yeah, really. I love that he thinks that the texts are somehow... helping him. This shows that I finally said, well, if there's no evidence, then I can't be on board. But
right, because ultimately on January 6th, did not.
But what judgment he shows? Yes,
14 hours a day he spent trying to get these state legislators to throw out the electors and put in their own slate.
Yes, that's what he claims. And then, one, it never worked. And then, two, so then he gets, the leopard ate his face, and he was sad about that, right? Trump finds out that he ultimately says no to the whole scheme, and he comes, I don't even remember exactly what he said and when about Mike Lee, but Mike Lee does. He's very sad that Trump doesn't honor his loyalty. It's amazing. But just one of like 4 or 5 instances in this chain of events where Mike Lee shows an astonishing lack of understanding of national politics.
Yes.
And, I mean, he's just been living in a bubble, I guess, that Trump isn't loyal to anybody. Wow, big surprise. You need to speak to. Have you heard of this Sidney Powell person? She's a genius.
This is just wild.
Unbelievable. Like, right, exactly. Like, there's texts. You know who's great? Hitler. You should listen to this guy. Trains running fantastic. You should try him out. Like, it doesn't hold up well. It doesn't age well, certainly.
I would very much like to see Mike Lee questioned about this. He might be back home in Utah. They've sort of seized on this. He's up for re-election this year. And the local media was great about immediately going to his primary opponents, including Evan McMullen, the guy who he's very conservative, right. But he really does apparently is a constitutional conservative, understanding the Constitution as opposed to using that phrase as Mike Lee likes to do. Yeah. So it may have some bearing on his position at home, but the national media is just sort of, Yeah,
I understand that was not mentioned at all on Sunday, for instance.
On any of the Sunday shows, not one mention of it.
That is weird.
What's sort of interesting to me, too, is, conservatives might... It was Ted Cruz's former comms person. I can't think of her name right now off the top of my head.
Amanda Carpenter, you're thinking of?
Amanda Carpenter, yes, thank you. Immediately that he lied to Woodward and Robert Costa in their book about the insurrection when he told them that he had only heard of the Eastman memo on, I think he said January 4th.
Yeah, somewhere about then, right in January.
Yeah,
when in fact,
right before, and he was shocked.
I tell you
that this idea was being put forward, but he'd been hyping the whole Eastman plan from pretty much the very beginning.
Yes, right after hyping, you gotta talk to Sidney Powell. I think he sees the press conference and says,
maybe not so much as Sidney Powell.
But you should talk to John Eastman. And I guess at that point, the excuse now is, well, he hadn't written the memo at that point. But I understand from something I read yesterday that John Eastman first floated the alternative slate of electors plan you'll never guess, in Florida in 2000. That he went to testify before the state legislature while the case was still in court and said, you have plenary power here to undo this. You don't need to wait for the Supreme Court to rule on what happens. You can just withdraw our electors and substitute new ones. And he testified. It's on C-SPAN. So
wow,
there's
I didn't
tape.
see that.
I just saw it myself yesterday. So he's been developing this theory for 25 years. Or nearly, and we'll say 20, even though it's 22. But that it's I don't know whether Mike Lee knew that necessarily, but certainly the idea that that he would come out with this memo couldn't have surprised him because he himself had urged the same plan in his texts to Meadows. I guess the difference is he would say, well, the legislators have to make an official act of it. It can't just be make up your own electors and have your own meeting. And that was his point of departure. But I guess the fact that, a dozen or more states have changed or purported to change their election law since would now mean, like Brad Raffensperger, I'm uncomfortable doing it under the current state of the law, but if you change this wording, I will steal an election for you. Mm-hmm. So, they ought to call him out on that, and he may, I don't know, if he's the kind of person that feels embarrassment about these things, but he must, because otherwise why lie to Robert Costa and Bob Woodward? Yes.
Right. But then to see him... because I sat through all of those days of Supreme Court hearings with Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yes.
Watching him lecture on the Constitution, on the three branches of government, because, of course, he's the worst of the mansplainers on the committee.
That's pretty bad.
He's just so awful.
And she knows all
And
that.
to know that this guy trying to mansplain the Constitution to her was the same guy who
Right. Oh, and
was
of
trying
course,
to overthrow the election.
you can't say it because you're
I
trying to
had
get
sort of
through.
a boomerang reaction to that going back to that hearing. So
Yeah. I mean, wow. And now it's one of those things where you wish, if only, she hadn't been dependent on the whole thing to try to get you just want to keep your head down. But imagine
Yep.
saying, you thought Sidney Powell knew what she was talking about. You thought John Eastman knew what he was talking about. What do you know about anything?
And this whole thing, how he still has a seat on the Judiciary Committee, how he got a seat on the Judiciary Committee in the first place. He should not be the guy who's helping to pick judges, is what I'm saying.
And you're right to say that. Let me send you, by the way, I'm going to send you there was a tweet that had the whole thread about Eastman and his testimony and the C-SPAN tape. So I'll share that with you.
Thank you very much.
Interested with that. I will.
Because I'm writing up Eastman and his trying to withhold 3,200 documents with 37,000 pages under attorney-client privilege, which I don't think is going to fly with this judge, but it's another delaying tactic that might.
So interesting. So again, we're back. I mean, didn't he already lose one case about this?
Yes, he did.
So. But this is another day, a different day with a different document, and now we have to review every page.
He's going to try to make the judge review every page and determine whether attorney-client privilege should
we
apply.
Shall see.
And he probably won't get it, but it's going to take time.
Right. Well, that's always the tactic, and. I think they're really just looking to run out the clock and hoping to just try and steal that election like they're planning for. I don't know if they can run out 8 years, so they need to steal the next election. They were going to try anyway. No point in waiting. But easier to kill 4 years than 8. So maybe that's all that's necessary. Well, life goes on for a while until the mask thing screws it up. But man,
yeah.
These people are nuts, and and don't. I mean, I don't think anybody listening ever was likely to say, "Yeah, Mike Lee has a point. Maybe this does exonerate him." No one was going to buy that, but
no.
But we are going to watch in real time while others do. But he says he
and they're just not going to question it.
I guess
is
not.
The thing. They're just okay, whatever.
I guess so.
There's Josh Hawley standing out in front of the insurrectionists with his fist raised.
Yeah.
He's still on the Judiciary Committee.
Right.
Raising QAnon questions about pedophilia with a judge who could run legal circles around him.
Yep. And probably will for a while. They'll Hawley and Lee and things that they champion will end up before the Supreme Court, and at the very least, I guess they'll come in for scathing dissents, if not a defeat anytime soon. But time will catch up with the conservative 6 just as surely as it does with everyone else.
Maybe sooner
faster.
with Clarence Thomas than the rest.
Yeah, how's he doing these days?
Yet.
Right. I mean, he's out of the hospital, but who knows?
Yeah.
If he's been drinking his fish tank, he might not be long for the world. I don't know. We don't know what's wrong with him.
He would be one.
That's true. And, I don't know. Maybe there's any number of choices that they make that are probably not great for their extended lives. But then I guess Trump is also depending on the 33-year-olds as well. And lots of people, tongue-in-cheek, but unfortunately true, pointing out she'll be on the bench making decisions for, 50 years, maybe.
Yep. That's just terrifying. Court expansion now, please. Thank you. All of the courts.
Particularly
the circuits and the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
I don't know how else to do this other than dilute their influence with qualified judges.
That's the only way that's on the books now. That's the only way Mike Lee would accept right now.
Impeaching isn't going to happen. It's just not.
No. Well, I mean, if they can't impeach somebody under the circumstances that Trump was impeached under, it's a nullity. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's true and unfortunate, and we're going to have to live with it. But so that's the only way. Dilute them by replacing them with others as they leave and expanding the court and creating more seats. Yep. And it's going to have to be hard.
I would say that using impeachment as a tool to keep the conversation going so that we can get court expansion would not necessarily be a bad idea.
Okay, right, sure. Make use of the tool, even if you know it's not necessarily going to lead to anything. It's not like the Senate was conducting any real business anyway. Go ahead.
Right.
You may be right. Okay.
Which we'll probably get back to when they're back in session next week.
Okay.
Week after. All right.
All right. Well, thank you for stopping by, and hope things remain calm in your neighborhood. And I know it was kind of a crazy day to jump into, but I appreciate having your thoughts on these nutty judges and more on Mike Lee as well. Talk to you
are
again.
Most welcome. Talk to you next week.
Terrific. All right. I sent you that article. You should have some fun with it. Go watch the video. We'll hand things off next to Justice Putnam. Thanks, Joan. See you next week.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That's right. That's what your problem has been all morning. Okay. Now, you've fixed it because Justice Putnam comes up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see. Yes. Some very interesting discussion coming up about who has and hasn't heard of the term eliminationist rhetoric. Perhaps you'll be surprised to find out who says they didn't know.